This is my first podcast, where every episode brings a new idea to life. So, I have to ask, did you ever think we would be sitting here in 2026 discussing an absolute war of words between Charley Crockett, Jack White, and a satanic doo-wop group?
Absolutely not. I mean, if you had handed me that headline 3 weeks ago, I would have assumed it was generated by some kind of absurd indie rock Mad Libs generator.
It is real, though. It is very real. And honestly, the whole thing started over something that seems almost mundane on paper. Charley Crockett, who has built his whole reputation on this fiercely independent, traditional outlaw country aesthetic, dropped Twin Temple from his tour lineup. And Twin Temple, for anyone not familiar, they describe themselves as a satanic doo-wop duo.
Right. They do the whole aesthetic. The robes, the occult references, set to vintage 60s soul and doo-wop rhythms. So Crockett pulls them from the bill. And according to Charley, it was just a simple decision about tour fit and audience expectations. But then the media gets a hold of it, Twin Temple puts out their take, and enter Jack White from Third Man Records.
Right. Jack White steps into the arena by posting 80s song lyrics on Instagram aimed directly at Crockett. I think he quoted 80s pop lyrics to mock Crockett for being narrow-minded or dramatic about the whole thing.
And Crockett did not take that lying down. He fired back with a remarkably defiant message, letting Jack White know he is not backing down in their ongoing beef. Crockett basically alleged that Twin Temple, the music press, and Jack White himself were exploiting a routine scheduling and vibe decision for personal gain and media clicks.
Which brings us right to the fundamental question here, doesn't it? Where does a headliner's right to curate their own show end? And where does theatrical genre bending get protected? I mean, look at Jack White's perspective. Third Man Records is built entirely on the idea that rock and roll is an elastic, weird, theatrical space where you mix blues, garage, punk, and performance art. To Jack, dropping a band because of their theatrical gimmick looks like narrow-minded genre policing.
Okay, but hold on, Oliver. Let us talk about what it actually means to build a country show. Charley Crockett plays to traditional country fans, people who care deeply about a specific atmosphere, a certain authenticity of staging. If you put a satanic doo-wop act right before an outlaw country set, you are fundamentally altering the experience for the ticket holder who paid $60 to sit in that venue. Crockett is not censorious for wanting his opening act to complement the main event. That is just basic tour management.
Is it just basic tour management, though? I mean, I remember going to a concert a few years back. It was a heavy post-rock show. Very moody, atmospheric, full of long instrumentals. And the promoter, for reasons only known to God, decided to open with a hyperactive electro-pop comedy rap act. The energy in the room was completely destroyed before the main band even tuned their guitars. The crowd was bewildered, the opener was visibly angry, and the vibe was shot for the first 40 minutes of the main set.
Exactly. That is precisely what Charley Crockett was trying to avoid. You prove my point entirely.
Wait, no. Let me finish my thought. Because while that show was awkward, it also made me realise how safe and sterile live music becomes if headliners only ever tour with exact sonic clones of themselves. If every country show only has another country show opening, where is the friction? Jack White's whole philosophy with Third Man is that friction is where spark happens. Mixing Twin Temple with traditional country is provocative, sure, but rock and roll was built on provocative combinations.
I get that. I really do. But there is a line between friction and cynicism. And what Crockett pointed out, which I think is very perceptive, is how quickly this got turned into a public spectacle. The moment Twin Temple and Jack White turn a simple lineup change into a grand crusade about artistic freedom, it feels manufactured. It feels like leveraging headline outrage, because Satanic Doo-Wop needs the press bump far more than Charley Crockett does.
So you see Jack White's intervention as patronizing?
I think Jack White loves being the defender of the weird, but in this specific instance, he stepped into a room where he did not understand the floor dynamics. Outlaw country fans are not against theatricality, but they respect directness. Crockett made a direct call for his audience, and turning it into a social media circus with 80s lyrics feels a bit like cheap shots from Nashville royalty.
That is fair. Though I will say, there is something delightfully absurd about seeing major figures in American roots music throwing down over 60s doo-wop Satanism. It proves that despite streaming algorithms flattening everything into quiet background playlists, people still care passionately about who stands on what stage and why.
Oh, absolutely. If nothing else, Charley Crockett proved he will not be pushed around by industry heavyweights, and Jack White proved he is still paying very close attention to every corner of the independent scene.
Now, speaking of clashes and industry heavyweights, let us shift to a legal fight that sounds like something straight out of an intellectual property textbook. Metalcore veterans Demon Hunter are currently in the process of suing Netflix.
And the reason for the lawsuit is the upcoming 2025 animated feature film titled K-pop Demon Hunters, right?
Precisely. Demon Hunter, who have been touring, releasing albums, and building a massive brand in the heavy music scene for over 2 decades, are asserting that Netflix using K-pop Demon Hunters for a massive global movie property infringes on their trademark and creates immediate market confusion.
This is such a messy intersection of corporate streaming brute force and niche brand equity. Because on one hand, Demon Hunter feels like a fairly generic combination of 2 English words. You hear Demon Hunter, you think video games, fantasy fiction, folklore. But on the other hand, inside the music and entertainment ecosystem, Demon Hunter the band has held registered domain names, merchandise lines, and album trademarks under that exact name since the early 2000s.
Right. And when a streaming titan like Netflix drops a high-budget movie titled K-pop Demon Hunters, what happens when you search Demon Hunter on Spotify, Google, or YouTube? The band's search results get completely buried under movie trailers, soundtrack singles, and algorithmic recommendation floods. That is real commercial harm for an independent metal band whose livelihood depends on digital discoverability.
It is the classic David and Goliath dynamic. But Netflix is likely going to argue that K-pop acts as a clear modifier, distinguishing the movie's subject matter from a heavy metalcore band. The question for the courts will be whether a consumer looking for heavy metal records could reasonably be confused by an animated K-pop film, which, on the surface, feels unlikely. But in search engine optimization terms, the overlap is devastating.
It truly is. Now, while Demon Hunter is fighting to protect their name from being crowded out, another classic band is fighting to keep their music alive after devastating losses. We have to talk about ZZ Top.
Yeah, this story is heartbreaking, but also remarkable. ZZ Top recently lost their longtime drummer, Frank Beard, and this comes just 4 years after the death of their iconic bassist, Dusty Hill.
Members of Guns N' Roses, Foghat, and Rage Against the Machine have all been paying tribute to Frank Beard over the past day or 2. But what really caught my attention was Billy Gibbons confirming that ZZ Top will actually keep touring despite Frank's passing.
And according to Billy Gibbons, that decision was not made lightly. Gibbons explicitly stated that continuing to tour is exactly what Frank Beard wanted, just like Dusty Hill explicitly asked them to keep the band moving forward with Elwood Francis on bass before Dusty passed away.
And here is where I find myself deeply torn, Claire. I love ZZ Top. Everyone loves ZZ Top. But when you lose the entire original rhythm section, when the only original member left standing on that stage is Billy Gibbons, is it really still ZZ Top? Or does it become a very high-end, official tribute act?
Oh, come on, Oliver. Billy Gibbons is the tone, the guitar, and the voice of ZZ Top. As long as Billy Gibbons is plugging in that guitar and singing those classic riffs, the soul of the band is right there. We are talking about blues rock traditions here. Blues music has always been about continuation, passing the torch, keeping the songs alive in front of audiences. To stop playing those songs because members pass away feels like burying the music alive.
I understand the blues tradition argument. I really do. But a band like ZZ Top was never just a collection of interchangeable session players playing sheet music. The chemistry between Frank Beard's shuffle, Dusty Hill's driving bass lines, and Billy's guitar was a specific, unrepeatable magic. When you replace 2/3 of the trio, the sonic identity changes fundamentally. Why not tour as the Billy Gibbons Band, playing the music of ZZ Top?
Because the fans in those arenas want to celebrate ZZ Top. They want to stand in a crowd of 5,000 or 10,000 people and experience those songs under the banner that defined 5 decades of rock history. If Frank Beard sat down with Billy before he died and said, "Keep the machine running, keep playing my drum parts," who are we to tell Billy Gibbons he is diluting his own legacy? He lived it.
I respect that. I really do respect the commitment to honouring a brother's last wishes. But as a listener, there is a point where the continuity feels more like institutional inertia than artistic necessity. We are seeing it across rock and metal right now. Bands replacing 3, 4, 5 members and keeping the logo. It changes what a band actually means.
Maybe what a band means in 2026 is different than what it meant in 1976. Maybe today, a legendary rock band is more like a symphony orchestra or a theater institution. The name represents the body of work, and as long as the torchbearer is leading it with integrity, the audience clearly wants to be there.
A living blues rock legacy versus a preserved museum piece. It is a debate every aging rock titan will have to face eventually.
Speaking of lineup shifts and how bands evolve over time, we have some massive announcements in the modern rock and heavy scenes. Let us start with Anne Boleyn.
Ah yes, Anne Boleyn have formally announced their next studio album, titled Currency. This marks the full continuation of what fans are calling the Matty Mullins era of the band.
And they had a bit of a chaotic rollout, didn't they? They started with social media teasers, but then accidentally leaked the official album cover art directly on Spotify ahead of schedule, before making the formal announcement.
The classic Spotify back-end slip-up. It happens to the best of them. But what is really fascinating here is how Anne Boleyn has handled replacing their iconic original frontman, Stephen Christian. Bringing in Matty Mullins, who everyone knows as the vocalist for Memphis May Fire, was a huge risk for a band with such a dedicated, nostalgic fan base.
It really was. And while Anne Boleyn is moving forward into this new era with Currency, we are also seeing heavy acts like Wage War dropping absolute bangers. Wage War just released a new heavy track called Sweet Dreams, after dropping a couple of cryptic teaser videos on social media over the past week.
Wage War is on absolute fire right now. But hold on, before we jump into Wage War, I want to talk about sludge supergroup Down, because this story blown my mind today. Down has announced their first new studio album in 19 years.
19 years! That is nearly 2 decades since their last full-length studio project. And the details coming out of this record are wild, particularly a featured track where Phil Anselmo does a duet with King Diamond.
A duet between Phil Anselmo and King Diamond on a heavy sludge metal album. That sounds like something invented in an old-school metal forum thread in 2005. You have Anselmo's crushing, guttural southern sludge roar, paired with King Diamond's operatic falsetto theatricality. That contrast alone makes this one of the most anticipated heavy releases in years.
It really highlights the contrast in how fans react to changes in vocal identity versus long-awaited returns. When Down comes back after 19 years with Phil Anselmo at the helm, there is an immediate electric nostalgia. But when a band like Anberlin replaces Stephen Christian with Matty Mullins, fans are forced to negotiate their entire relationship with the band's identity.
Which raises a personal question for you, Claire. How do you personally handle it when a band you grew up with replaces its lead singer? Does your loyalty stay with the instrumental songwriting, or is the voice so central that once it changes, it becomes a different band in your head?
I remember this vividly from high school. My absolute favorite emo band replaced their lead singer right after their second album. I was devastated. I bought the new record out of obligation, and I listened to it trying so hard to force myself to love it. But every time a chorus hit, my brain was mentally superimposing the original singer's tone over the new guy. The vocal signature of a band is like a human thumbprint. You can match the chord progressions, you can use the same guitar tones, but the timbre of a specific human voice carries all the emotional memory for the listener.
So, did you ever get over it with that band? Or did you drop them?
I dropped them for about 5 years. It was only much later, when I listened back without the raw emotional attachment, that I realized the third album was actually objectively great songwriting. But I had to let go of the expectation that it was the same entity. I think that is what Anberlin fans are navigating with Matty Mullins. If you accept Currency as a fresh chapter, rather than a replacement of Stephen Christian, there is incredible music to be enjoyed.
That is a very mature perspective. Though I will say, with Down, having Phil Anselmo back, with King Diamond joining in, means fans do not have to make any mental compromises. They are getting pure, unfiltered, heavy nostalgia, dialed straight to 11.
Absolutely. 19 years is a long time to wait, but that duet might just make it worth every single year.
Let us pivot from heavy riffs to heavy tabletop lore. Wizards of the Coast has been making some significant moves recently, expanding Dungeons & Dragons into major crossover and digital spaces.
Right. First up, we have the Dungeons & Dragons times Stranger Things. Welcome to the Hellfire Club box set, which recently hit shelves. This set features a collaboration between artist Butcher Billy and Wizards of the Coast's managing game designer for D&D, Justice Ramin Arman.
And beyond the physical tabletop releases, Wizards of the Coast also announced that industry veteran Stig Asmussen is leading his studio, Giant Skull, to develop an original AAA Dungeons & Dragons action-adventure video game.
Now, that Stig Asmussen news is massive. Asmussen was the director behind Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor at Respawn. Bringing someone of his caliber in to build a brand new single-player narrative action game set in the D&D universe shows just how serious Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast are about converting tabletop IP into digital gaming blockbusters.
It is a clear transmedia push, isn't it? You have Stranger Things drawing in pop culture nostalgia on the physical side with high-concept artwork from Butcher Billy, and you have Stig Asmussen building a high-budget video game to capture the console and PC audience. But I have to voice my skepticism here, Claire. Is there a danger that Dungeons & Dragons is becoming so bloated with external pop culture crossovers that it loses its core identity as an open-ended system for imagination?
Oh, Oliver, come on. Dungeons & Dragons has always been a sponge for pop culture. In the 1970s, Gary Gygax and the original creators were pulling directly from Tolkien, Elric, Conan the Barbarian, and cheesy 60s monster movies. The idea that D&D was ever some pure, uncorrupted vacuum is a complete myth. Bringing in Stranger Things or hiring top-tier game directors like Stig Asmussen simply updates the cultural entry points for a modern audience.
Pulling inspiration from fantasy literature to build a rulebook is fundamentally different than selling pre-packaged nostalgia boxes co-branded with a Netflix show. When you buy a Stranger Things Hellfire Club set, you are not inventing a world with your friends at a table. You are consuming a pre-packaged media tie-in. It shifts the player from an active creator to a passive consumer of brand synergy.
I disagree completely. How many teenagers or young adults watched Stranger Things, saw the Hellfire Club playing D&D in Eddie Munson's basement, and said, "Hey, I want to try that"? The box set gives them a familiar, welcoming doorway into the hobby. Once they sit down at the table with those dice, once the initial module is over, they realize they can go anywhere and do anything. It is an onboarding ramp, not a prison.
That is a fair point about onboarding. But what about the video game side? When you translate a tabletop role-playing game into a AAA action-adventure video game directed by Stig Asmussen, you are inherently flattening the infinite freedom of tabletop play into coded branching paths and pre-rendered combat animations. Baldur's Gate 3 succeeded because it painstakingly recreated the mechanical depth of 5th edition. A third-person action-adventure game risks turning D&D into just another cinematic hack-and-slash skin.
Why can't D&D be both? Tabletop players still have their books, their dice, and their homebrew campaigns. A single-player action-adventure game gives people who love the lore of the Forgotten Realms another way to experience that world when they cannot assemble 6 adults for a 4-hour Sunday gaming session. It enriches the ecosystem rather than diluting it.
Well, as long as Wizards of the Coast remembers that the heart of the game sits around a wooden table with paper sheets and dice, maybe the ecosystem can handle a few cinematic blockbusters on the side.
Finally today, let us talk about the economic machine driving trading card games. Ravensburger's head of TCGs, Elaine Chase, recently gave an exclusive interview detailing major structural changes coming to Disney Lorcana, specifically the introduction of collector boosters and an ultra-rare serialized card tier called Illustrious.
This is a massive strategic shift for Lorcana. Let us break down the exact details Elaine Chase laid out. Each Illustrious card design will be strictly limited and numbered to only 23 copies worldwide. Only 23 copies.
And that number 23 is a direct nod to 1923, the year the Walt Disney Company was founded. The debut set will feature 6 distinct Illustrious card designs, one for each ink color in the game, creating a total pool of exactly 138 Illustrious cards in existence, globally for that set. The first one revealed was Maleficent Biding Her Time, illustrated by Kendall Hale.
Now, crucially, Elaine Chase emphasized that these Illustrious cards can only be found inside the new collector boosters. But she was very firm on one point. Regular display boosters remain completely unchanged. The drop rates for enchanted and iconic cards in standard packs will stay exactly as they were before. Collector boosters are designed as a limited supply, premium special treat, primarily distributed through local hobby stores.
And this is where I have to step in and express my serious concern about where tabletop card games are heading. We saw Magic the Gathering do this exact same thing with their Lord of the Rings and Marvel crossover sets, introducing serialized chase cards that turned pack cracking into hyper-financialized slot machines. By introducing numbered cards limited to 23 copies worldwide, Ravensburger is bringing high-stakes speculative asset hunting directly into a game designed for Disney fans and families.
Hold on, Claire. let us look at the economic reality for the local game stores that keep these communities alive. Elaine Chase explicitly stated that local hobby game stores, the Ravensburger Play Hub stores, will receive the vast majority of product allocations for these collector boosters. When a small game shop can sell high-margin collector boosters to high-end collectors, that profit margin pays the shop's rent, lights and tournament staff. It subsidises the casual players who come in to play weekly events for free or cheap.
That is the ideal pitch, Oliver, but in practice, it creates toxic market behavior. It invites scalpers and secondary market flippers to wipe out local store inventory the minute product lands on shelves. Casual players walk into their local store hoping to buy a couple of packs, and suddenly everything is marked up or sold out because people are chasing a serialized Maleficent card worth thousands of dollars on eBay. It shifts the culture from playing a card game to opening lottery tickets.
Except Elaine Chase specifically addressed that. She explicitly reassured players that regular display boosters are untouched. The game pieces, the cards you need to build competitive decks and play with your kids, remain totally accessible in standard packs at standard retail prices. The serialized illustrious cards are purely cosmetic luxury items for high-end collectors who want to fund the game's ecosystem. If a wealthy collector wants to pay 10 grand for a numbered Maleficent, how does that hurt the kid playing a Mickey Mouse deck at the kitchen table?
Because it changes how the publisher designs and prioritizes future sets. When a board game or trading card company realizes they can generate millions in revenue by chasing artificial scarcity rather than balancing card mechanics or supporting grassroots tournament structures, the editorial focus drifts toward high-end collectible gimmicks. We are watching trading card games swallow up tabletop culture and transform it into speculative finance.
It is a delicate tightrope to walk, no doubt about it. If Ravensburger keeps collector boosters strictly additive, without starving regular packs or jacking up base prices, it might actually work as a sustainable model. But if the line between game piece and financial asset blurs too much, the soul of the game gets lost.
Exactly. The moment a kid feels like they are playing with secondary market financial tokens instead of Disney heroes, the magic disappears pretty quickly.
Well, whether it is satanic doo-wop feuds, replacing legendary drummers, or hunting for one of 23 Maleficent cards worldwide, music and tabletop gaming certainly know how to keep things interesting.
They certainly do. Good chatting with you, Oliver.
Talk soon, Claire.